Hello everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. In today's tutorial, I'll be showing you how to integrate the Momo payment in your Flutter app with Paystack. So if you are interested and happy to see this build, consider subscribing, like and share this video as well. So with that said, let's jump right in. So to ensure everyone is on the same page, in my main.dat file, I'll just create a home page widget over here. Stateful widget with a blank scaffold, right? So let's start by creating a transaction model, right? So within the lib folder, I'll create a directory and I'm going to name this directory as the transaction. There you go. So within the transaction folder, I'll create a file and that file is going to be named as the transaction.dat. That's where we are going to create our entity, our model, right? So I'll start by creating a class called transaction. So within the transaction class, we'll be accessing the amount in the form of a string and also the reference as well, a string, and also we need the currency and also the user email, right? So let's require that in the constructor as well. So you need to require that. There you go. So in here we need to create from JSON and also to JSON method on these classes, right? So from JSON you create a factory transaction.from JSON. So it takes in a map of string and dynamic. A map of string and dynamic, and it's going to be called JSON. So in here we need to return the transaction. So with the amount, we pass in JSON and pass in our amount in a string format. So this is how we convert it from JSON. So I'll be doing same for the reference, the currency, and also the email as well. There you go. So the next step is to also create from JSON to JSON method, right? And that type is also going to return a map of string and dynamic, and the method is going to be to JSON. So within that we return the amount to be the amount and also the reference to be the reference. I'll be doing same for the currency and the Gmail as well. So this is the way to go about in creating from JSON and also to JSON method, right? So once we are done, just saving the changes over here. And also we also need to create the Paystack response model, right? You can see it returns a status of true, a message, and also the data once the response is 200, which means everything went well. So we need to access the data in this response, and the data returns the authorization URL, the access code, and also the reference. So we are interested in the data field in the response, right? So let's create a model for that. So within the lib folder, I'll create a directory, and this directory is going to be called the Paystack. So within the Paystack directory, I'll also create a file. And I'm going to name this file as the Paystack auto response, right? .dat. So once we have that, let's create the entity for the Paystack response. So we are going to have a class of Paystack response. So since we are interested in the data of the response, right, and the data brings the authorization URL, the reference, and also the access code, so we create a field for that. So the first one is going to be the authorization URL. So I'll just create the return type of that authorization URL is string. And also you need to access the access code as well. We're interested in the access code, and finally the reference as well. So once we are done, we need to generate a constructor field for that. There you go. So we need to create from JSON and also to JSON method, as we did the same for the transaction. So creating from JSON method in this factory paystack auth response from JSON, which takes in the map of string and dynamic, right? And we are going to call this JSON. So within that, you can just return the paystack auth response. Oops, not this one. Okay, so with the authorization URL from JSON method, it's going to be like this. There we go. So we'll be doing the same for the access code and also the reference as well. The next step is to create to JSON method, and the return type of that is string and dynamic, right? And the method is going to be called to JSON. So in here, we need to return the authorization URL and pass in its respective value. So with the authorization URL, you pass it. So this is the way we go about in creating from JSON and also to JSON method. There you go. So you are done with the modeling of the paystack and also the transaction. So the next step is to focus on building the home page, right? So we need to create a form key over here. So global key form state. So we also need to create a field for getting the user email, the amount, and also the reference as well. So I'll be doing that over here. You're going to have the amount controller, and it's going to be of type text editing controller. So we need to create another variable for the reference controller, and that also is going to be of text editing controller. And lastly, you also need the email controller. So let's start with an app bar over here. So within the scaffold, we have our app bar. So let's specify the title of this app bar. So the title of this app bar is going to take in the text of Momo payment. So let's add const. Let's set elevation to 0. So the body of this app bar, we start with a form. So the child of this form is going to be a column. That's where we're going to place our test form field, right? So the column in turn takes in the children that you can specify a list of widgets within the column. So let's give the form a key of our form key. So within the children of this column, the first child of this column is going to be a test form field. That's our input for getting the user details. So with the controller of this form, let's assign the amount controller, right? And also let's provide some validator over here. So it's basically a function that takes in the value. So in here we made a check. if the value is empty, right, if the value is empty, then return a message of required field missing, right, else return null value. There we go. So the test form field is also going to take in the decoration, that is in the input decoration. So within the input decoration, let's start with a label test. So with the label test, let's provide an amount over here and also the hint text, more or less like a placeholder over here. So let's provide it a hint text. So enter the amount. So with the border, let's give it an outline input border, right, to have that rounded corner. There we go. So I think that's basically it. You can save in the changes. Let's provide a const over here to get rid of the errors, and also so let's run our project to see. There you go. So you can see this is what we have so far. So let's give it enough padding to have space around it. So let's wrap the column with a padding, and this padding is going to affect all sizes. Let's provide a value of 15. You can see you have enough space around it. So I'll just grab the test form field over here and repeat the same thing. So with the controller over here, we just give it the reference controller. So with the label test, you provide it a reference and also enter the reference as well. So let's wrap the test form field within the padding widget, and this padding is only going to affect the top side. So let's provide a top value of 20, and let's save in the changes. There we go. So we need one more input for the email as well. So I'll just grab and just paste it over here. So with the controller, you will specify it to be the email controller, and also the label test is going to be our email, and enter your email. There we go. So the next step is to provide a button, right? So you're going to have elevated button below the test form field, right? So it comes with an onPress. That's going to be the function that gets called, and also the child. So the child of this elevated button is going to be a test of proceed to make payments. So that's going to be the child of this button. It's going to take in a text to make payment. So the onPress of this button, for now, let's set it to this. Let's save in the changes. There you go. You can see it over there, right? So let's wrap the button within a sized box, and let's provide a width for it. So with the width, let's set it to double.infinity so that it can take the entire width, right? It's more or less like 100% of it. And also let's provide a height to this button, a height of 45. So let's save in the changes. There we go. So let's provide some padding to this button from top, right? So I'll wrap it within a padding widget, and this padding is only going to affect the top sides. So we provide it a top value of 20 so we can have enough space at the top. There you go. So we've provided various inputs for getting the details. So the next step is to navigate to the payments page, right? So let's make a check over here, right? If our form key dot current state dot validate, you are checking for the input field. If it validates, right? So I'll just check for the opposite of that over here. So let's check the opposite of that, right? So if it's false, we'll just return, else we just navigate to the payments page, right? So use navigator dot push, so it takes in the context into the route. So with the route, you pass in a material page route, and the material page route takes in the builder, and the builder is basically a function that takes in the context, and with the context we just navigate to a different page. So I'll be navigating to the payments page widget, which is not yet created, so I'll be creating it sooner. So I'll just provide it a value of payments page widget. There you go. So it's not yet created, so let's head over to our lib folder and create it. So you can just create it within the lib folder, right? So I'll create a file of payments page. So in here, I'll just generate a stateful widget, right, of payments page. So for now, let's return a scaffold over here. There you go. Let's save in the changes. So let's get back to the home page and import the payments page we just navigated. So let's import that. So let's provide the amount, the reference, and also the email to the payments page so that we can just verify through that. So with the amount, we will give it our amount controller.text, and also the email, we provide our email controller.text. That's the way we access the value from the user. And also finally, let's provide our reference, and also with the reference, we provide our reference controller.text. So we are getting an error because we don't record that in the constructor of the payments page. So we'll be doing that sooner, right? So once we are done with that, let's move on to the payments page widget and record that within the constructor. So within the payments page over here, within the constructor, we need to require the various fields we just provided, right? So the first one, we're going to require the amount. The next one, you are going to require the email as well, and the third one is a reference. So we need to create a variable to host those variables. A variable to hold those values. So I'll create a final string of an amount, and also doing same for the email and the reference. So there you go. You can see we have no more else over here. So here is where we add the functionality to create a transaction, to initialize a transaction, right? So here's where we need to create a function for creating a transaction. So the function is going to be of type the paystack auth response entity we just created, right? It's going to be of type future paystack auth response. So that's the return type we need. And the function is going to be called create transactions. create transaction. So to create a transaction, we need a transaction, that particular transaction. So we need to pass that as a parameter, right? So it's an asynchronous call as well. So we need to import our transaction over here, and also our Paystack auth response. There you go. So in creating a transaction, let's first of all get the endpoint, right? So I just create a variable to hold the endpoint, right? String URL. I'm going to hit this kind of endpoint, https://api.paystack.co/transaction/initialize. So that's the endpoint we are going to hit. So once we get an endpoint, let's also create a variable data to hold a transaction, then convert that to what? A JSON method. So let's try to create a transaction, right? So we get a response back. So I created a response variable over here. So we need to import the HTTP package. So I'll be using that for making the request. So Flutter pub add HTTP. So you need to add that as a dependency. So once you have that successfully installed, you can just import that at the top. So import HTTP as HTTP. So you can make use of HTTP. So http.post, right? So within the post method, it requires the URL, right? So just provide its URL above. So to make sure that the URL is in a valid format, we use the URI.pass. Then we pass in our URL. There we go. So the next step is also to provide our headers, right? Oh, my bad. That should come outside from it. Yeah. So headers. So with the headers, we need to provide our authorization and also the content type, right? So with the authorization, is going to be bearer. Then we access our API key. So you can see you can have access to our API key. Just sign up. So use the test key, right? Since we are testing it over here. So I create a file API key.dat. So I'll just create a class API keys over here. So I'll create a variable to hold my API key, and I'm going to call this variable as the secret key. So I'll just paste that and just saving the changes. So within the payments page, so the headers authorization bearer, then we pass in our API key. So I can access my API key by typing API key.secret key. So that's it. We also need to pass in the content type, right? And the content type is going to be application/JSON. So once we specify the URL and the headers, the next one is to provide the body, right? And the body is going to be JSON and code. Then we pass in our data. So we need to import the .dat convert to get rid of the errors. There we go. So now let's check the status of the response, right? So if the status of the response, right, if the response the status code is equal to 200, meaning everything went okay, right? We create a response data. variable, and I'm going to decode our response.body. So once we have our body decoded, we need to return our paystack auth response and access the data field within it. That's what we're interested in. So dot from JSON, then you pass in a response data and access the data field from the response. There you go. So if you're not having a status code of 200, you're going to throw an error, payment unsuccessful, for whatever reason. So we'll be doing same on a section. You're also going to throw the same error. There you go. So let's save in the changes over here. So once we have our functionality in creating a transaction, let's also create a function for initializing that transaction, right? So the return type of that function is going to be of type string, and the function name is going to be initialize transaction, right? So that is going to trigger the create transaction, right? And it's going to be an asynchronous function as well. So in here, let's try to initialize the transaction. So in the try block, we just try to pass the amount to a double, right? Since we are accepting that as a test, right? So we use double dot pass, then we access the widget dot amount. So in this situation, the price will hold a value of double. And also let's try to create a transaction, right? An instance of a transaction. So we just bring our transaction entity over here. So in here we need to provide it the amount, the reference, the currency, and also the email, right? So with the amount, we access the amount from the user. It's going to be our price multiplied by 100. Then we convert that to a string. So this is the format. And also we need to provide the reference as well. And it's going to be the widget.reference. And the currency is going to be GHS. That's the Ghana currency. And also the email is going to be widget.email. There you go. So once we've created the transaction instance, right? So let's create a variable auth response to hold our transaction response, right? So we are going to await and call our method the create transaction, and we need to pass the transaction to it, right? So with the response of this, let's return the auth response dot authorization URL. You will get the authorization URL back. That's the URL we need, right? Because so with the catch method over here, we just print the error. So in here we can just return the e.toString. There you go. So within the scaffold, let's start with the safe area view and provide it a feature builder, right? So the feature builder takes in the builder, and the builder is basically a function that takes in the context over here, and also the snapshot. The snapshot is what holds the data, right? So it takes in the context and the snapshot. The feature builder also takes in the future, right? So the feature basically is going to listen to a function, and we're going to provide it the initialize transaction function, right? So it's going to listen to this function and get called, right? Let's get rid of the const. So here you can make a check over here if our snapshot holds the data indeed, right? So if the snapshot dot has data, you can just assign the data to the URL, right? So it's going to be snapshot.data. So once you have that, we just return. So I'll just use this package, that's the Webview Flutter. So I'll just install that. So Paystack will handle everything on the web for you, right? So Flutter pub add Webview. So the URL comes in the form of a link. So when you pass it to the Webview, then you proceed to make the payment. That's the whole idea. So once we've gotten the URL, we need to return something. We are going to return the Webview widget, right? And it is in the controller. The controller needs to be in this form, Webview controller. So I just grab the snippet over here. So once the page loads, the first link is going to load is the load request, right? And that hits the flutter.dev link. So I'll just change that to our data, the URL. That's what we want to load, right? So load request is going to be URL.parse. So the URL.parse, make sure that it is in a valid format. So let's provide another check over here. So if the snapshot is now or doesn't have data yet, right, we are going to return a circular progress indicator to indicate that something is loading. There you go. So I think that's basically it. Let's give it a try. So let's provide an amount over here, an amount of 100 cedis. Enter the reference. So the reference needs to be here. And also let's provide it our email. So a message will be sent to this email once we have a successful transaction, right? So you can see the loading indicator. Once you get the data, you can see you can pay with our mobile money over here. So this is the test number you can use to confirm. You can get pay from any of these providers. So you can hit the button, you can see boom, and there you go, you have it, payment successful. See you in our next tutorial. Until then, stay tuned.